If you're in my age group, as the vast majority of you guys are, and you grew up watching the Premier League, you're probably very familiar with the exploits of the recently retired Wayne Rooney. And seeing that we've now established that you are familiar with Rooney, you probably also know that he's widely regarded as perhaps the most naturally talented English footballer of his generation. Now, before you raise your pitchforks at me, we're not gathered here today to debate this. That comes next week. Today, we're here to look into the life and career of probably the most naturally talented footballer of the generation directly before Rooney's era, Paul Gascoigne. On his day, Gazza was one of the most exciting players to watch. His abilities on the ball are highly renowned even to this day. However, from very early on, up until his middle ages, his life was filled with tragedy, misfortune, and an array of self-destructive tendencies. Bearing this in mind makes what he managed to achieve in his life and career all the more impressive, albeit deeply saddening. But none of that really matters without really getting into the details of his life journey as well as his career in football. And with that being said, how good was Paul Gascoigne really? Yo, what's up everyone? I hope you're all doing well and having an incredible day. Today, we'll be taking a deep look into the career of a troubled footballing genius, Paul Gascoigne. Be sure to stick around till the end of the video to get the full story. And finally, if you like this kind of content, don't be afraid to hit that like button and possibly even subscribe if you haven't, as it massively helps the channel out. But of course, no pressure. Anyway, let's get right into it. Born in Gateshead in 1967, to say that Paul Gascoigne had a troubled childhood would be putting it very lightly. In his autobiography, he states that from as early as 7 years of age, he developed an obsession with death, a fixation on how very real it can be, the permanence of its nature. As you can imagine, as a 7-year-old, this instilled a deep-lying fear within him. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worst only 3 years later, when he was only 10 years of age. He was taking care of a 6-year-old boy by the name of Stephen Spraggan, the younger brother of a friend of his. In what seemed like a split second, the boy wandered into the streets and was struck by an ice cream truck, killing him instantly. Gascoigne blamed himself for the incident, claiming he briefly took his eyes off the boy, and that was all it took. Around this same period in time, his father began to have seizures, and he developed twitches akin to symptoms of Tourette's disorder, and to top it all off, he also developed obsessive behaviors. One such obsession that he developed was an addiction to slot machines, so much so that he spent almost all of his money on them and began to shoplift in order to feed the addiction. But in the midst of all of this loss and tragedy, there was a shining light which brought Gascoigne the therapy that he so thoroughly needed: football. When he was playing football, he felt at ease. In his own words, Gascoigne once stated, "I didn't have twitches or worry about death when I was playing football." And he was magical with the ball at feet, being deployed in the central midfield position from early days. Brian Tinian, an accomplished player in his own right, as well as the friend of Gascoigne from early on in life, once said, "Gazza was an unbelievable talent. He was so natural, you couldn't coach him." And he clearly wasn't the only one who thought that. Gascoigne went on to sign for Newcastle United under an apprenticeship at 16 years of age. However, tragedy was never too far from him. At 17 years of age, another friend of his, Stephen Wilson, fell victim to an accident on a building site. The only reason that Wilson was on the site in the first place was due to the fact that Gascoigne had convinced him to leave Middlesbrough, whom he already had an apprenticeship with, in favour of Newcastle United. While waiting for an opportunity to open up at Newcastle, he was making ends meet by working on a construction site where he unfortunately passed away. Again, Gascoigne blamed himself. He even labelled himself as a jinx. Understandably, being exposed to this level of trauma, especially early in life, is bound to have an adverse effect on anyone. However, Gascoigne pushed on. After all, he had responsibilities. He saw football as a way to provide for his family in a way that none of them could really emulate, so he forged ahead with that in mind. As a footballer, from the outside looking in, he didn't really have the physique of an athlete at all. This may have been as a result of the fact that he would consistently eat junk food. Although despite this, Jack Charlton, former Newcastle manager and 1966 World Cup legend, gave him the benefit of the doubt and didn't really mind the extra weight initially. This is because it didn't really seem to slow him down, and the bulkiness even potentially added to his strength on the ball. Speaking of being on the ball, and we'll go into more detail about this later on in the story, but Gascoigne was on a whole other level from a playing perspective. A generational talent by every sense of the term. The balance, the flair, the charisma, the technique, the impudence, it was all there from very early on. And to top it all off, his work rate was incredible. Despite being overweight and not up to physical standards by many accounts, he was like a rabid dog on the field, chasing down every loose ball. In 1985, after being forced to lose a little bit of weight, Gascoigne captained the Newcastle youth team to the FA Youth Cup. His stock was rising very quickly, and soon after that, he was given his debut for the Newcastle first team in the 1985-86 season. He was 18 years of age at this time. Between 1985 and 1988, Gascoigne's reputation did nothing but grow. He was quickly showing the country just how much of a talent he really was. So much so that some were even prepared to call him the best player in the world. And I guess Vinnie Jones was having none of that. Anyway, in the 1987-88 season of the First Division, Gascoigne ended up winning the PFA Young Player of the Year award, making 35 appearances and scoring 7 goals in the process. In turn, he became the #1 transfer target for just about every top team in the country. As the story goes, Manchester United were in the race for his signature, and Gascoigne even admits to promising Sir Alex Ferguson that he would sign for them. With this in mind, Ferguson went on holiday to Malta, confident that he would get his man upon his return. However, unbeknownst to him, Gascoigne had been approached by Tottenham Hotspur, whom he eventually went on to sign for, after they offered to buy his family a house and his sister a sunbed. Gascoigne later went on to state that United failed to match the offer, and even joked that it was probably the sunbed that they couldn't afford. He once said, "She should have got a spray tan, and I would have had a few more medals." He was 22 years old when he made this transfer. In his first 2 seasons at Spurs, he aided in a steady climb up the league table, helping the club finish in 6th in the 1988-89 season. And with the addition of Gary Lineker in the very next season, Spurs climbed up to 3rd place. In these 2 seasons, Gascoigne managed to make 66 appearances, scoring 12 in the process. However, despite his rising domestic profile, it was his performances and demeanour on the international stage that would truly capture the hearts of not only the English, but also the world. By the time the 1990 World Cup in Italy came around, the English were looking very formidable indeed. Not only did they possess the aforementioned Paul Gascoigne and Gary Lineker, but they also had other legendary players in their ranks, such as John Barnes, David Platt, and Chris Waddle, to name a few. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that this was England's greatest World Cup performance in decades. So many decades, in fact, that this performance was heralded as the English national team's best performance since last winning the competition in 1966. And I guess it goes without saying that this group of players was in exceptional form, with a 23-year-old Gascoigne being the centerpiece that made them tick. He inspired late winners against Egypt, Belgium, and Cameroon, and helped the Three Lions progress all the way through to the semi-finals where they faced West Germany. When doing the research for this video, I came across an extremely well-written article by Cole Morton of The Independent, outlining Gascoigne's performances in this World Cup. To quote Morton directly, when talking about how he felt watching Gascoigne at this tournament, "It was better than Baywatch, and for the generation of men and women who were roughly the same age as you, it was some kind of miracle. You looked like one of us, but played like one of them. Pele, Cruyff, Maradona, the greatest of the great. If you could do that, then surely anything was possible." If you want to read the full article, which I highly recommend you do if you're interested, that is, the link can be found in the description. Regrettably, it wasn't meant to be. In an unfortunate turn of events, Gascoigne was booked for a reckless challenge, which meant he would be suspended for the final had England made it through. This booking resulted in probably Gascoigne's most iconic photograph of all time. His tears were indicative of nothing but passion. However, this later turned to anguish as England were knocked out by West Germany on penalties. But something else had happened. Gascoigne had fully endeared himself to the British public, and his stock was at an all-time high on both a domestic and an international front. The man was officially a global superstar. Back on the domestic front, Gascoigne enjoyed arguably his greatest season yet. Although Spurs finished in 10th place, they went on to win the FA Cup at the end of the 1990-91 season. This was Gascoigne's first piece of silverware in his senior career and proved to be the only trophy that he would ever win in England. To go along with that, he scored 19 goals in 37 appearances overall, making him the club's joint top scorer for the season alongside Gary Lineker. However, in the FA Cup final itself, Gascoigne went on to rupture a cruciate ligament in his right knee, an injury which kept him on the sidelines for the entirety of the next season. He even went on to further antagonize the injury on a night out in his hometown. Now, I don't want any of my previous talk of him being an international superstar to overshadow his larger-than-life personality. Let's not forget, the guy was wild. And all while this was going on, and even stretching back to before he first received the injury, Spurs had been approached by Italian side Lazio to acquire his signature. And understandably, due to their declining financial position, accepting the £5.5 million offered for him was essentially a no-brainer for Tottenham Hotspur. At the time, when Spurs coach Terry Venables was asked about how he felt about Gascoigne leaving for Italy, he responded by saying, "I'm very pleased for Paul, but it's like watching your mother-in-law drive off a cliff in your new car."
A bit of a weird analogy.
Everybody knew exactly what I was talking about.
Once in Italy, despite showing flickers of the player he once was, he was never truly the same. He faced several struggles with injury, weight, cultural barriers, and just overall poor professionalism. Of course, in hindsight, knowing who the man was and still is, we can look back at some of his actions and understand that that's simply how he expressed himself. Now, I'm in no way excusing or condoning his behavior, but it's hard not to at least chuckle at the absolute craziness of this man. Now, the list of antics that he got up to in Italy, as well as over his entire career for that matter, are far too long to include in just one video. However, here's a short list of his exploits between the years of 1992 and 1995. He once greeted the Lazio owner at the time, his boss by the way, Sergio Cragnotti, by telling him that his daughter had a big personality. He once told the entire country of Norway to f*** off in an interview on live television right before a World Cup qualifier against them. He once showed up to preseason training 13 kilograms overweight. He once burped into a microphone after being asked how he felt about being dropped by Lazio. Before you ask, yes, this was on live TV. And finally, he broke his leg in training after a failed attempt at tackling Alessandro Nesta. This left him injured on the sidelines for an entire year. Overall, Gascoigne spent 3 eventful yet unsuccessful seasons in Italy, where he made 47 appearances and scored 6 goals overall. Not sure if I've already mentioned this in this video or not, but this guy was wild. After spending just about the entirety of the 1994-95 season on the nursing bed, he was eventually sold to Scottish outfit Rangers for £4.3 million in July of 1995. Just a reminder that he was only 27 years old at this point. To give you a little bit of context, the Rangers team that Gascoigne walked into was no joke. They faced stiff competition against some very strong teams in the Scottish top flight. Gascoigne was going to have to be at his A game if he truly wanted to revive his career at Rangers. Funnily enough, that's exactly what happened. In fact, almost as soon as he arrived, he cemented himself in Rangers history by scoring the second goal in a 2-0 win against Celtic in the Old Firm derby. The significance of this win can't be overstated, as this game turned out to be the only game that Celtic lost over the entire season. Rangers went on to win the league, with Gascoigne playing 28 games and scoring 14. His career had truly endured a stunning revival. Back on the international front, Gaz's career revival couldn't have come at a better time. Coming off his incredible debut season with Rangers, England hosted the 1996 UEFA Euros. Something I skipped over earlier on in this video is that England failed to even qualify for the 1994 World Cup in the US. Therefore, England and Gascoigne were particularly motivated to do well in this tournament. And just like in the 1990 World Cup 6 years prior, England made it all the way through to the semi-finals of the competition. Similarly, just like the 1990 World Cup, they were matched up against Germany at this stage of the tournament. And, well, you know what they say about history repeating itself. You've probably guessed by now that Germany won on penalties after 120 minutes of match time. Despite this, the highlight of the tournament, from an English perspective at least, surely came in the group stages, where England beat Scotland 2-0. One of these goals, scored by Gascoigne himself, was absolutely out of this world, and all it took was 2 touches. Unreal. Adding on to that, the fact that he was playing in the Scottish Domestic League at the time definitely added just a little something to this goal. And the celebration was pretty iconic too, let's not forget that. Taking things back to Rangers, he found the spark that he'd been missing for so many years. His flair, his decisiveness, even his fitness seemed to be back on track. More success followed the very next season, with Rangers winning yet another league title. Again, Gascoigne played a starring role, making 26 appearances and scoring 13. Despite this, his third and final season at Rangers wasn't as successful as the ones that preceded it. Rangers failed to retain the league title, losing out to Celtic, and were beaten in the Scottish Cup final by Hearts. He actually didn't even end up finishing the full season at the club, as he ended up leaving only halfway through the season. This was after concerns over his alcohol consumption were reaching a tipping point amongst the Rangers higher-ups. Not only that, but as we're already aware, Gascoigne was certainly never far from a good bit of controversy. A highly controversial celebration of his after scoring in the Old Firm derby resulted in him receiving death threats from the Irish Republican Army. However, to add the comic relief that we all desperately need in this story, as a prank, he also once took a dump in Gattuso's sock. And just so we're all on the same page, yes, we're thinking of the same Gattuso.
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
Following his time at Rangers, Gascoigne made his return to England halfway through the 1997-98 season of the First Division, signing for Middlesbrough for a reported fee of £3.45 million. However, he never truly recaptured his spark in the years that followed, and unfortunately, there were several reasons for this. Despite his downfall being there to see for several years, arguably even before he even left England in the first place, His return to England marked the start of a truly saddening course of events. His struggles with alcoholism were as prevalent as ever. This was only exasperated further after experiencing even more loss after a friend of his passed on following a night out drinking. In the years that followed, Gascoigne went on to play for Everton, Burnley, Gansu Tianma, and Boston United, all the while suffering from mental disorders, deep depression, and constantly being in and out of rehab. This culminated in him eventually retiring from professional football in 2005. The years that followed his retirement unfortunately didn't bring much optimism or improvement to his situation. It seemed as though almost every week we would see a new story about him, and not the good kind either. However, it does genuinely seem as though things are coming right. Now in his 50s, Gascoigne has actively been attempting to curb his addictions. He's even recently reported that he has much better control over his cravings than before. We can only wish him well and hope that he's been able to make peace with the past. In closing, Gascoigne was a flawed man. I don't think you'll hear any arguments from anyone indicating otherwise. However, it's important to note that we're all a product of our environments. Again, in no way am I condoning any of his negative behaviors, but being able to look back at his life story and the experiences that shaped his actions gives a telling perspective. Of course, in the moment, it's never easy to be this sensible and understanding of someone whom we believe to be, let's be honest, completely irreverent. Perhaps there's a lesson in that. However, I'll leave it to minds smarter than mine to make any meaning of it. Having said that, from a footballing perspective, Gascoigne was really something else in his prime, wasn't he? Too bad the prime didn't last too long, however. I personally only had the chance of watching him during the back end of his career, but even then, there were glimpses here and there. And I really wish I could coherently fit all the ups and downs of his life and career into this one video, but it would just get too messy. Trust me, I tried. I haven't even mentioned some of his more admirable traits, such as his unwavering philanthropy and charitable pursuits. However, if you are interested in reading up more on these topics, feel free to check out the sources for the information used in this video in the description, or simply just manifest the power of Google to get the answers you need. And there we have it. I'd be interested to hear all your thoughts on the legend that is Gazza. How would you rate his career overall? Adding on to that, many people believe that one of Gascoigne's biggest mistakes was not joining Manchester United, not only because it would have done wonders for his trophy cabinet, but also because of the assumed effect that Sir Alex Ferguson may have had on his life moving forward. It's an interesting thought for sure. I'd be keen to hear what your thoughts are on this in the comments. Anyway, this has been a bit of a long one. Apologies for that. However, if you like these kinds of videos, why not consider checking out my channel and perhaps even subscribing and turning on notifications for future uploads. However, no pressure, of course. Anyway, that's all from me today. I hope you're all having a cracking day. Cheers, and I'll catch you in the next one.